Can you tell everybody who you are, please?
Sure. I'm Lee Wilcox. And I felt compelled to come out and share my story with the Vaxxed team today because my son is 13 now. His name is Ethan. And his story is a little bit less dramatic because his regression was slow over time, and I didn't fully piece it together until he was probably 5. But I remember when he was born, I was hesitant to allow the hepatitis B vaccine at birth, and I declined it in the hospital. And I remember the nurses really pressuring me and saying, well, okay, fine, but when you go in for your 2-week checkup, he has to have it then, he has to. And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks thinking about it. But we had a difficult delivery, and I was not healing properly, and I was exhausted and getting no sleep. And when you have a newborn, life is crazy. And by the time I got to the doctor's office and asked my questions, he very much alleviated my concerns. It's no problem. This, I vaccinate my children. And there was pressure. There was definitely pressure to do it. So that started kind of my brainwashing of, yes, we're going to do this. It's going to be fine. Good mothers vaccinate. So Ethan was very healthy at birth, was developing actually kind of precociously, speaking very early, huge vocabulary, and but gradually we started noticing meltdowns and that he wouldn't be able to share well with his friends in his play group. And even though he was speaking very precociously, he wouldn't sleep through the night. And there were all these gradual signs. I have pictures of him on the floor lining up toys. And I remember at one point my dad said to me when we were out to visit, because they live in a different state, he was taking us back to the airport, and he said, well, do you think Ethan has autism? And I said, what do you mean? Like, he talks to everybody, he's in everybody's business, he knows what a trapezoid is, for goodness sake. And I just remember thinking, how could that be possible? So I asked my pediatrician at the next well visit. And of course the pediatrician said, well, no, I don't see any signs of that, but we'll keep an eye on it. And then all the while we just kept vaccinating. So by the time Ethan was 4 years old, he was in a Montessori preschool, and we were seeing lots of symptoms and signs of Asperger's syndrome. But I didn't know what that was at the time. I didn't know that that's what I was seeing. In the Montessori preschool, after Ethan had his 4-year-old vaccines, all of his vaccines, plus 2 weeks later a flu shot, we saw a tremendous decline in behavior. And every day I would go to pick him up in the carpool lane, and his teacher had one more negative thing to say. And I remember sitting in the car one day, and she came out and she left him. Actually, he was on the slide, and he wouldn't come down from the slide. And she said, you're going to have to go get him because I can't get him to come. And he dumped out the fish bowl again, and he's going to have to stop that because the children all think he's trying to kill the fish. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And so that was a wake-up call to me to dig deeper. So we went back to the pediatrician, and we went back to get more information and started seeking out other people to evaluate. And so finally at that time, he did qualify for an autism diagnosis. The way that it was actually written in his school paperwork was moderate autism, but one of the evaluators pulled me aside and she said, I really think on paper this really, and in person, on paper it says moderate autism. In person, the words that you need to know are Asperger's, and you need to go and you need to look this up and you need to learn all that you can. And so then we went, we talked to our neurologist, and our neurologist felt the same way. So I started digging in, I got connected with other moms, and I realized that his vaccines played a role, and he had lots of environmental toxins, and that it wasn't as cut and dried as the pediatrician led me to believe, and that there was so much that we weren't told, and that we didn't know, and that detrimentally affected his health. So he wasn't detoxifying well, and instead of being in Pee Wee football and playing T-ball, he was in therapy. Thank you.
How old is he now, did you say?
He's 13.
He's 13, yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for telling your story.
Thanks
I
for
think they're out there with
listening.
the
With the
pen
pen.
now.
Okay.
You want to come and
Yes.
sign?
Yes,
Does everybody want to
absolutely.
do that?
Yes.
Come on, mamas. We won't let them forget what they did to our children.